Hi, my name is Zelman Ainsworth. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of APTV. I'm really excited to have the CEO of apg Group, Martin Matthews. apg Group have the iconic Australian fashion brands Sportscraft and Saba and Jag, which they're about to relaunch. I'm really excited to have this interview. Martin has fantastic experience in sales, retail, culture, customer engagement, shopping centers, and high streets. Martin is one of the true retailers that are running major organizations and is going to share with us some of the experiences and lessons he's had throughout his journey and how to manage a fashion brand in that middle market in a competitive retail industry. Thank you again. I really hope you do enjoy it. There's a big discussion happening at the moment that should retailers' online sales be included in their shopping center turnover rents. You run Sportscraft, Saba, and Jag. What's your views on it? Should Westfield get online sales of Sportscraft?
The default retailer response is no, absolutely not. We brought in the customer for online. We're paying the landlord for traffic into our stores. So if we've had to get that traffic somewhere else, then why should they get it? So that's sort of the default response. And I think on the current business model, on relatively high fixed rents with a turnover-based rent, that absolutely applies. It should not be included because at the end of the day, we're already paying a lot of money to get traffic into a physical store. So I don't want to give any more money to the landlord for the work we've had to do to bring in an online shopper, and it just happens that the stock is in this store and the order gets fulfilled here. That said, I think that there's a huge opportunity for a structural shift in the way rents work. If we were working to competitive turnover-based rents, then there's merit in the idea. Because what that would do is it would take away all the noise between landlords and retailers operationally over where a sale goes, and we could all focus on actually just serving the customer. It gives us a much more sustainable model when there's, it's been an unusual year where obviously at some point sales shifted heavily over to online. Had landlords at the time moved to a turnover model including online sales, they would have benefited during that period. But retailers would have been happy too because everyone has some certainty and there's kind of a fair commercial arrangement. I think the most important thing is that if everybody has the same incentives, so we're not fighting each other over where sales should be recorded or we just can focus on maximising the sales, that's what retail should be about, right?
But fundamentally, is online and in-store one business, or are they two separate competing businesses?
Well, we'd like to think of it as one business. When I talk to my customer, I want to talk to them as if I'm one brand, not, here's an in-store solution and here's an online solution. That should be a very integrated experience. And we know most of our shoppers now start their journey online, and that is what's changed. So, the high rents we're paying sort of is on the presumption that the shopping journey or the acquisition journey for a customer starts here in a shopping centre, and more often than not now it's starting online. We're finding and reaching those customers with digital advertising. They're engaging with our brand image and our look and feel, and then we continue to sort of take them through a customer journey, and ultimately it might end in an in-store transaction. And we want to do that, and we also want to do that with passing traffic with an exciting window and a great service experience. We don't want to have to think about the two things as a different commercial outcome ultimately. So if there is a way of making that work, which would require a significant compromise from landlords on their current high fixed rents, then we'd be open-minded. So I might be unusual in that regard.
So what's the answer if Peter Allen or Grant Kelly rings you tomorrow for advice? What would you tell them?
Well, I think the first step they've got to take is to understand that for many retailers the high fixed rents are unsustainable and there needs to be significant adjustment there.
But it's been sustainable for decades.
Well, sustainable and sustainable, So I've seen a lot of retailers' numbers and in a lot of centres you've got people that are doing 40% occupancy cost in specialty fashion. Now at 40% op cost, can some retailers keep going? Well, possibly they can. What do they do at 40% op cost? They don't make any margin. They can't fund marketing. They have no choice but to pay the rent. They have no choice but to pay the wages. So they cut all the other things off. You don't get store refurbishments. You end up with tired stores. You end up with a poor customer experience. And ultimately, you see a drop-off in sales, in activity, in excitement, and everybody loses out of that outcome. So that has to change. I mean, what we saw in COVID was actually a lot of landlords were very proactive in their support in the end, and I think they probably they took a structural adjustment in that period. The cost of funding went down. A lot of them had to take significant write-offs, and I think that the point there is, well, that's real. You know, some of that structural shift inflated asset valuations for some of these properties were, as the market has now proved, were way above a genuine market value, and I think that's the adjustment that unfortunately has to happen for everybody in order to get to a point where we can operate where we're all profitable.
So you're saying structural changes. That's a great word. What does it actually mean in practice?
Yeah, so I think basically the model of get as high a fixed rent as you can with as high a ratchet each year as you can, it ultimately is what has been slowly strangling retailers, and that's where you get these. How does a retailer end up in a 40% op cost? You know, they had a pretty profitable store. Sales have roughly held flat, but their occupancy has been compounding at CPI plus 2.5 every year, or 5-6%. That type of inflation, it does not reflect the market. It does not reflect foot traffic growth, sales growth, and that was baked into valuations of centres. That obviously has changed significantly in the last, let's say decade, but with obviously a sharp shot when COVID hit. And I think we now need to think differently about it. I'm a big advocate for turnover-based rent models.
So turnover only, no base?
Look, I mean, every model is different, and I think an element of base can make sense. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the landlords also have to make sure that they have retailers that are operating at a base level in their centres that they can generate a return on. But I think that the base needs to be significantly different to where it has been, and in many cases that's 70-80% below where it has been. I mean, we don't mind giving some of our upside to landlords, and if they help drive traffic to the centre, if they help us be successful, then great. We're getting what we paid for, and so I see a huge opportunity in that, and I think it'll improve working relationships. I think that's the most important thing.
Now you're talking about lower base or no base, turnover only. How do you expect landlords to provide incentives to tenants in those arrangements? And how do you expect banks to value properties that don't have any forecast income coming? Well, it's based on your performance of your business.
That excuse is the excuse of, I'll start with the second part first. I mean, the excuse of we can't forecast income. I mean, every other business that exists in consumer and retail has to forecast income based on a sales plan. I don't get a contract from my customers saying they're going to spend $400 a year minimum with us, in order to which I go to the banks and then borrow money. So I've never understood that point. I think landlords are, it's a convenient argument to give to a retailer, but the reality is you can forecast based on the level of sales turnover you expect to do in your centre, the traffic you expect to bring in, and the performance of your retailers. So again, it puts the onus on landlords to do a real job. You want a significant premium for your property? That's what you've got to do. You've got to be able to create traffic, and you've got to help your retailers generate sales and get a good mix of tenants in your centre as well. So we don't mind the pressure of having to perform either.
Right. Now back to the incentive part. Tenants rely on landlord funding to build their shops based on future income the landlord's projected to get. So if you stop that whole model, how are you going to pay for your fit outs? Yeah,
well, I mean, again, a landlord has to make an estimate of if they believe in the retailer, if they believe in the turnover the retailer can do, and it's worth having them in their centre, then they'll be able to work out what they can afford to get that retailer in the door. And again, I think it sharpens up the decision making, doesn't it?
So you talk about 40% op costs for retailers. Just for sake of clarity, if a retailer the difference between a good retailer and a bad retailer is how they engage their customers and what they do with their income. So for every $100 a retailer makes in fashion, can you break it down where every dollar is supposed to go?
I mean, look, in vertical fashion, I mean, it's as most people know, it's a relatively high margin, high cost business. So you start with relatively high, let's say 70% gross margins. Most people finish somewhere in the 60s. If you're doing well, it'll be in the high 60s. If you're doing poorly, it can be possibly start in the 50s, which is a bad result. Let's say at 60, you've got to pay for some form of profit. You've obviously got to pay for the overheads that support the functioning of your brand. So that's probably 30%, which then leaves you 30% for rent and wages if you're performing well. Now wages are generally around the 20% mark, which would leave only 10% for rent. Now that's not what most retailers are operating at, and if you work back through there, you see that there'll be many retailers operating below a 10% profit margin. That's really not sustainable. That's where investment doesn't happen. And that's really the difference between, say, a sustainable 15% op cost versus a 25 or 30% op cost, where that spare cash would have gone, that now has to just kind of fund the maintenance of the business. Was, if there was a reasonable margin, then that's going into investment, growth, customer experience. Whereas if you're left with kind of razor thin 3 to 5% margins, everyone's really just hanging on and paying the bills.
What does a retail experience actually mean?
Look, it's really simple. I mean, it's a human experience. At the end of the day, it's making a connection with the customer, making them feel good about interacting with you. And it doesn't just mean selling. At the end of the day, we want them to feel welcome in our stores. We want them to feel good about their interactions with our people. And I think a lot of that is very, very little things, which I think has been forgotten in retail. Retail's become a very KPI-driven industry. Everyone's measuring everything, and then the natural thing is that you tell people to behave via KPIs rather than human interaction. So instead of saying, I want you to greet every customer and introduce yourself by name, and that's what we'll measure you on, we say, well, we want you to convert 15% of our customers, and next year we want you to convert 16% of our customers. And so then it just drives a completely different behaviour. So
You wonder why online's taking over stores.
Spot on. So I think for us it's for me at least, it's just simple things. It's just old-fashioned retailing was just about being friendly, helpful, and positive, and energy is a huge part of it. And translating that to the digital world is the biggest challenge retailers have today. So I think in Australia, most retailers are struggling with, how do you sell full price in the digital world? So it does tend to be that people push a lot of their markdown product onto online.
How many staff members do you have across all those brands?
We have 1,200 staff.
So how do you train 1,200 staff to introduce themselves by the first name?
That's a good question. I have a guy called Tony whose job it is to do that. But no, it's a major focus for us. And I think what we're working on is setting clear service standards for each of the brands. I mentioned greeting by name. That's an example of a service standard, and I think they're the types of things that we want to be doing.
Your online sales, where is that up to as far as the percentage of sales you have?
Online sales have peaked at during COVID above 30% of our sales, but I think when we normalise that, we're probably in the sort of low to mid 20s, which is still strong for a retailer.
Where were you 2018 and 19?
Well, look, I've only just joined the business, so I don't know all of these numbers, but I think roughly we were at about 15% and then about 18%. So there's been significant growth in
Literally doubled.
Yeah.
But once you break that customer habit to shop online, they're not going to disappear.
We've seen obviously since the peak, when stores were actually closed and there was no other option, we've certainly seen a reduction in the penetration of online, but we have seen overall increase in adoption, and definitely the customers that weren't habitual online shoppers are now accustomed to the online shopping experience. I think the only thing that people have missed here, because I saw some data from Australia Post the other day that actually most of the growth in that period came from shoppers who were already online shoppers. There was a small percentage of growth came from completely new customers to the online experience. Unfortunately, a lot of them had a bad experience in COVID because postage systems were disrupted. So the very first time they said, I'm going to take a risk, I'm going to shop online, and their parcel was somewhere in the Australia Post system for 6 weeks. So it's actually interesting. We all have a bit of work to do to encourage those guys to shop again. Saba
and Sportscraft are getting a lot of pressure from underneath from the fast fashion and a lot of pressure from the top from luxury. You guys sit in that middle market, which everyone's saying is one that's the toughest to survive in.
It depends how you define the middle market, I guess. I mean, it's a big market, it's a big spectrum. I mean, in Australia we have very large upper middle class relative to the rest of the world, right? So I think in other markets, you do see a much greater pulling apart. If you look at the breakdown of population in, say, China or the US, you've got a wealthy elite getting wealthier and they shop luxury, and then you've got everyone else who kind of shops mass, and that's where that middle market has been squeezed, particularly when mass has been effectively, well, propped up is the wrong term, but there's been a lot of innovation. So the big international players, H&M, Zara, have really made that mass market quite interesting and appealing to a normal shopper. So, I mean, our job is to be more interesting than them. At the end of the day, we have to get people to understand the quality that we put into our product, the longevity in the product. I think in Australia, the shopper is more conscious of that. I think they're not habitual shoppers. So in other parts of the world, shopping is like a major hobby for most of the population. In Australia, we don't really live that lifestyle, so shopping is still more with a purpose. And I think that's where, quality, craftsmanship, the heritage of our brands, the storytelling that we have comes through. So that's a huge opportunity, and we've got really iconic brands. We've got great stories to tell. So that's why I joined. I mean, I think it's an exciting time for Australian brands.
And how are you telling that story? Through which medium?
Well, through every medium we can. I mean,
what's the most effective way to tell the story, I should ask?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sort of a purist marketer in that I don't like to pick one. I think everyone gets a bit faddish. It's like, oh, we're going to put 100% of our budget in digital. And you're like, okay, but what about the customer that doesn't use Facebook, that doesn't use Instagram, or at least doesn't engage with our category? You have to be balanced in this. I mean, we historically we're very conventional. We would do all our advertising in outdoor media or fashion magazines. I think the biggest thing for me is I just think that this industry needs to be more interesting. Fashion tends to be very derivative, so we do nice clothes, nice model, posed in front of a nice scene, and that's kind of the core of everything we do. So we don't tend to necessarily have an idea or a conversation with the customer. So I think that's the opportunity for us. And with brands that have histories like the brands we do, the beautiful thing is we already have a place in society. We've been part in Sabre. We've dressed some of Australia's most successful people in sportscraft. Everybody's in Australia that's lived here for a long time has got a sportscraft item in the wardrobe, and so there are these unbelievable stories.
So Mick Jagger and other rock and roll stars really were the brands that carried the Jag. What happened?
Yeah. So this business only acquired Jag in 2013. So it's been through an interesting history. It was acquired from the founders. I think it was in the early 2000s by Colorado Group, and the brand had already been through some rough times at that point. And I think it's a brand that had this amazing personality. When you ask people about Jag from the 80s, their eyes light up. It's unbelievable. We've done research. People talk about Jag. There was a quote we saw from a customer of Jag in the time. It said, Jag made me feel like I wanted to be somebody. Never forget that feeling. I mean, that's amazing. Like, I've not seen that in brand research my entire career. Like, do people have that spirit attached to the brand? So I think what happened was that it got managed by companies that did not think about brand. They only thought about dollars. And I think this is, we talked about KPIs before. Sometimes you forget what really matters. The brand has a personality, has a spirit, the product comes with that. That's what appeals to the customer. That's what sells the jean or the t-shirt. And then what happens is a company says, well, we just want to sell more t-shirts, and if we discount them by 50% or if we produce them for $10 less, we'll sell more or we'll make more margin. And that becomes the thing, as opposed to the, what is this brand about? What does the customer want to buy this brand for? And if you get lost there as a brand, as opposed to in a mass market business, that's fine. At the end of the day, just meet the customer's needs at a price, get an efficient supply chain. That's Zara's model, that's H&M's model. You can't do that if you want to be a brand. And I think that I wasn't there. I don't know what happened over those 2 decades, but I think that's perhaps what happened. I think we have a huge opportunity because the brand now has, in a lot of consumers' minds, been out of that part of the market for quite a period of time. I mean, this business has done a great job of cleaning it up. It's in great distribution now. It's exclusively in David Jones, in concession stores, our own stores and online. And so now we have complete control over the brand. So we're not stuck with that discount presentation, mass market presentation of the product. So we have a great opportunity to build the love and the excitement and the attitude, personality back into that brand.
So what's your vision and plan for this brand? How do you bring it back and then compete with the competitors?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to be Australia's iconic denim brand. I mean, that's what we were. It's denim means casual wear in countries like Australia. I mean, that's what it means, and that's what we wear most of the time. Denim, or whatever you wear with denim, right? And not many other brands, in fact, no other brands can claim to be really Australia's iconic. I mean, 1972, that was it. First store in LA. You mentioned the celebrities that wore it. So we just need to regenerate that excitement. We need to get some marketing out there. We've got this great opportunity next year to tell customers that we're back on our 50th birthday. And so we can celebrate all those stories. And so we'll do some fun things as well. We want to play around with how we relaunch our store network. We'd like to do some really interesting collaborations. I can't announce any of those yet, but we're working on them. And we just like to change the shopping experience from being one that's just about, hey, I'm going to come in and here's a pile of jeans on a table and let me choose one, to being, how do we announce a personality and how do we have a bit of fun with the customer? And I don't know what that looks like yet, and I think we're going to experiment with different things. Some retailers have done simple things, just having the coffee shop in the store, just making it a more dynamic environment. We had a chat about food collaborations when we last met. I mean, that's interesting. That's a category that's exciting the customer at the moment. So, are there experiences we can bring in? So, I don't know what it looks like yet, but we're gonna try and push the boundaries and have some fun.
How exciting that you have a license to have fun with a brand with such a heritage.
Oh, yeah,
that's a rare opportunity in anyone's career to dust off a brand. Mr. Arnold is the only guy I know that gets to do that often. From LVMH, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
otherwise,
exactly.
that's good on you. And
these are unbelievable brands. I mean, that's why I'm here. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Yeah.
Good. You've been in retail for 20 plus years.
Yep.
If you could change one thing about the industry, what would it be?
I think it can be the lack of imagination in the industry. It does become a bit of an industry that follows itself. So everybody sort of does what everyone else does, and the self-referencing is actually unbelievable. I mean, you walk into boardrooms around retailers, and they reference themselves, their direct competitors. I mean, you Myer and David Jones, the amount of time they talk about each other as opposed to their customer or their real competitors, which are often out in the malls. So, and so, I think it's just, I would love, we all, you hear it all the time, let's be customer focused, but very few businesses actually do that. And, I talked about the imagination in the way we do marketing. I think there's a great opportunity to just, be a little more adventurous and talk to the consumer in a more familiar way rather than this derivative, clothes, beautiful model, beautiful backdrop, the end. Let's connect ourselves to things that matter to consumers beyond just fashion.
If you can, for any landlords watching this, what would your message be?
Come and talk to us. I mean, we've got great partnerships with a lot of our landlords. I certainly want to start thinking about what this looks like, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Some of these conversations are conversations that just don't happen at the day-to-day leasing level because, again, landlords have KPIs too. Everyone needs to deliver on leasing numbers, a number of leases, renewals, and so on. And so this sort of opportunity to talk differently about how you might work is pretty rare. So I'm open-minded, and I'd say come and chat to us, and other retailers I'm sure would like to have that conversation too.
And what would your message be to retailers watching this?
Focus on your customer, do what you do best, and just continue to really think about what that experience is and what it is in your organisation. That Bezos talks about day two companies and how they get so filled, and day two companies he talks about, day one is when you're full of exploration, you care about the consumer, and day two is when you've built a business, you've built a brand, and now you're just about exploiting that, making money. And in day two, you become very efficient, you have processes, you have KPIs, all of these things. So I think, my challenge to retailers is really have a think about where in your business you've built this complexity where it means that your people have lost sight of the real goal of what retailing is. Can you strip it back? Can you simplify? Can you just get back to what really matters?
And lastly, in your opinion, what separates a good retailer from a bad retailer?
I think it's that in a nutshell. It's the focus on the customer. It's understanding and responding to customers and being able to do that in a real way, no matter what the channel, online experience or in-store experience, and actually live up to that promise.
As the CEO of APG Group and these iconic Australian brands, what is your one goal you hope to achieve during your tenure here?
I'd love us to have a thriving international business. I really believe in the power of Australian brands overseas. I think Australian brands and businesses, with the exception of the few that have been successful, the people like Zimmerman and Aesop and T2. So there are some great examples. There's some great examples. But by and large, the industry sort of looks at itself as, oh, we're just Australian brands, you know. The market out there loves brand Australia. They love the lifestyle, and I think it's only become even more stark in the last year that we've had, just how great we've got it. And so that's what you're selling. When you're selling, you know, fashion lifestyle, you're selling the lifestyle of the people. And so we have that, and very few places in the world have that opportunity.
Do you aspire to take all your brands overseas?
Eventually, yes. Yeah, so we'd love to do that. We don't.
Overseas being US, Europe, Asia?
We don't mind. I mean, you know, I think that everybody talks about the US market first as if it's the only market. I mean, I think China is now probably a larger consumer market than the US market, or if it's not, it's about to be. So look, we're open-minded. I mean, I think there's a lot of things to think about in terms of which markets will work and why and what you need to do. But I think, you know, all major, relatively developed markets are attractive for us.
Great. Martin, thank you very much for taking time and letting us disrupt your store here in Doncaster by setting up a...
Yeah, I have a massive thank you for the retail team here for putting up with us and any customers that we've disrupted.
Sorry, ma'am, we're almost done.
Customer experience and getting in the way of our customers.
But thank you very, very much. It's been a really good conversation, and we look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Elman.